So, point number one that was brought up. I don't really want to go back and forth doing clips between these videos. It would take a lot of editing time, and frankly, I'm not lazy per se. I'm a little lazy, to be honest. It's a sin. I'm sorry. Forgive me. Oops. But basically, it takes a lot more time than I think it would really be worth. Just watch the original video. I've got it linked in the first one, if not also this one. Whatever. I may even have a timestamp link to it. I don't know. We'll see how that goes when I get there. First point that was brought up is the idea that atheists are really just one step farther along the kind of the chain of or the steps of skepticism and so forth. That why don't I believe in other gods? Why don't I believe in Zeus? Why don't I believe in Thor? And in a way, I do, but not in the way that the original believers in them would have. We'll get to that some other day. Why I am not a polytheist is primarily more of an issue of a philosophical problem and a little bit of a moral problem. See, because I actually have to be really well read, because when I was a little kid, I was extremely interested in old Greek, Roman, pagan mythologies, and to some extent the Middle Eastern mythologies and the Norse mythologies and things like that. I haven't read the whole Edda. I would like to. I think it would be a great thing to read. I've got a list. My hand can't go high enough. I've got an air duct over my head of books that I need to read up to and including. I cannot believe that I have never actually sat down and read Socrates' Apology before. I'll get to it as soon as I can. I promise. All these things are going to be done. But the point is when I was a kid, I did actually read a lot of these stories. Emotional, moral problem with being a pagan. I'll get to that one first because that's much easier. They're jerks. They're all jerks. They're jerks from the get-go, and popular culture has somehow made them into not being jerks. And I can't worship anything whatsoever that I'm certain I am morally superior to. For instance, why don't I worship Zeus? Well, if I believed he existed as the king of the gods in the same way that the ancient Greeks did, I would walk around with my middle finger pointed towards the sky constantly because he's a jerk. He's a philanderer. He didn't respect any of his children in any of his stories. He constantly cheated on Hera. He was a bigamist. And I have problems with all these things. I'm married. Got a ring and all that. I've never cheated on my wife. I never will. That doesn't really seem that hard to me to do. I actually love her and want good things to come of our relationship. Therefore, I will not cheat on her. It's that simple. Zeus had no problems cheating on his wife. And in Greek culture, it was a problem to cheat on your wife. That's why a number of people, especially the Athenians in particular, they didn't think it was cheating on your wife necessarily. There was some disagreement about this, even at the time. But a great many people didn't think it was cheating on your wife if it was sex with someone of the same sex. It was relatively common for male friends to not have any sort of romantic relationship with one another, but to still engage in sex, just for relief or whatever. If you really were hard up for sex, it wasn't even that big of a deal. It wasn't considered cheating in particular on your wife to go to like a priestess of not Delphi. The goddess of love. Suddenly can't remember her name. That's terrible of me, but I apologize for that. I do normally know what I'm talking about. Again, cold. Still, recorded on the same day. Having sex with them, no, that was an act of worship of the gods. You went in and you paid the temple. You made your offering to the temple, and then you'll get sexual favors from the priestesses. This was all an act of worship of the goddess of love and Venus, there we go. The Roman name, I believe. But in any case, that was not considered cheating on your wife. That wasn't immoral. But just having random sex with some woman other than your wife most certainly was. And they didn't really do that, but see, Zeus did, and they thought that was kind of a problem, but they overlooked it because that's the way the story went, because Zeus had to have various children with humans and whatever. So moral problems with most of them, and there were other pagan gods that were constantly wanting people to sacrifice children, and they're all. God should be kind of egocentric. He should be jealous for your affections. That'd be why he made you, to be in relation with you. But egocentric in the way of constantly do this or I'll kill you, don't do this and I won't. You need to worship me above other gods, and then the other gods come in and try to get you to do the other thing. And just constantly saying that you're prettier than some goddess, and then her like laying waste to an entire village or city or nation, whatever. Like, that's really petty. And to some extent, yes, these themes are somewhat similar in the Bible, and I'll get to those some other time. But it's not quite on the same level. It really has more to do with the idea that the ancient Hebrews, in particular, they made a contract, they made a covenant that them and all of their people, and they would renew this covenant every year, would forever worship only Yahweh. Always, for only, and ever. Always, 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 always. And if you wanted to opt out of the covenant, then that was a different thing altogether. And you had to like leave all of it behind forever and you couldn't be a Jew anymore, and there was a whole thing. It's not really borne out in the Old Testament because very few people ever actually did that, and there wasn't an excommunication process per se. You just didn't do that anymore. But that kind of contractually obligated them, and they agreed to the terms. That's kind of a thing. That makes sense. But now just any random person, say I worship Zeus, and then I say something bad about Hera, and now Hera is supposed to like take a dig at me for it, that doesn't make sense. Like, that's just being petty. It's crazy. Aside from the moral problem, which people can raise against Yahweh for various misunderstandings, there's the bigger philosophical problem of where did the gods come from? Because there are multiple of them. They're not all self-existent in any of the pagan origin stories. All pagan origin stories, all of them. The only ex nihilo creation story in any religion ever is in Judaism, initially, Christianity by extinction, and Islam by extinction. It's the only one that exists. All the rest of them assume that the universe is eternal, that everything has always been here. And therefore you have to assume an infinite regression of causality. That's a problem for me, because there's a logical way that that's possible. Atheists used to actually not believe in anything like the Big Bang. They actually used to run around and say that the universe is uncaused. The universe is eternal. They had to do this because if the universe was caused, if the universe had a beginning, then they had to posit a beginner, and they didn't want to do that, so the universe has always been here. We know that is not the case, in fact, that there was a time when there was no such thing as time, space, and matter. That's what started it. The Kalam cosmological argument. Things which begin to exist have a sufficient cause for the beginning of their existence. The universe began to exist a la the Big Bang. Therefore, the universe must have a sufficient cause for its existence. It doesn't really matter how you try and twist it around, you're going to have to come up with that somewhere. And that's kind of an issue. And you can't do that with paganism. So that's why I don't worship Thor, because he's a drunkard and a philanderer. And I'm not. So I'm superior to him. So I don't know why they don't just make me one of the gods if they exist. Because I'm obviously better than they are, so they should just do that. Otherwise, I can't believe in them because it's not logically consistent. So, I mean, that was kind of a long one. It sort of entailed a lot of nuance. I kind of try to avoid, but it's there, and it has to be dealt with. And no, the natural progression of skepticism then doesn't lead one to become an atheist. Atheism has an entirely different worldview altogether from any theistic viewpoint. Theists, no matter what kind of theist, pantheists, polytheists, monotheists, all theists, begin with some kind of assumption that there is some kind of God, either that we are all God, or that there is a God who is distinct from the universe. If there is at least some kind of God distinct from the universe, how many of them are there and why, and all of that. But we have to start with some kind of assumptions like that. Atheists start with the assumption that things are here and we don't know why, and we don't especially care. The Big Bang happened, it doesn't matter why, no one cares. Don't really need to explain that for some reason, philosophically. But that's just how it is. And that's a very different set of assumptions. It gets all the way down to your basic most assumption as to the origins of the entire universe. That's not the same thing as saying Zeus isn't real, Yahweh is, or vice versa. It just isn't the same thing at all. Or if you're going to go with classical Buddhism, it's atheistic. It just isn't worried about the beginnings, or I guess more like classically agnostic would be more fair. It's just not concerned with the presence or absence of gods and goddesses and so forth. Kind of the same with Hinduism, but not exactly. Everything is God in Hinduism. Different thing altogether. But that's a very different kind of view than, I don't know if there's a God, and there probably isn't one, and so I don't believe in any. And the assumption, the gulf of assumptions between naturalism and supernaturalism are so vast, I couldn't possibly cover that in a series of videos. My best advice to the original video that I'm posting to is, please, for your own sake and viewership, read any philosophical work on the nature of theism and atheism. Because, no offense, you don't seem to be terribly familiar with either. I don't like ending a video with an insult, and I don't mean it to be an insult, but from what you say, you don't seem to be very familiar with any of the arguments for either side. And that's a shame, since you're trying to convince people that Jesus isn't even real in the sense that the Bible says he is.